Okay, so I think you're ready to rock and roll.
Okay. Well, over the summer, we're continuing to focus on what Jesus said about various subjects. And today I'm going to talk about obedience. Now, as many of you know, our little puppy Smudge is not always as obedient as she could be. But we can learn a few things from dogs. So, for example, when loved ones come home, always run to greet them. Be loyal. If what you want lies buried, dig until you find it. When someone's having a bad day, be silent, sit close by and nuzzle them gently. On hot days, drink lots of water and lay under a shady tree. When you're happy, dance around and wag your body. No matter how often you're scolded, don't buy into the guilt thing and pout. Run right back and make friends. Delight in the simple joy of a long walk. And when it's in your best interest, practice obedience. So, it seems that this word has a negative connotation today. It seems to be associated with the blind adherence to rules that we see in some cultures, or the obedience demanded by totalitarian states enforced by the control of mobile phones. And yet Jesus spoke positively about the blessings and joy of obedience. So why is that? Well, sometimes it's for our own protection. I remember teaching our firstborn not to touch plug sockets, and it was important for him to learn that no means no. Because we can damage our lives and the lives of others by doing things contrary to the guidelines in the Bible, which is the Maker's Handbook. Did you know what the letters in Bible stand for? It's best instructions before leaving Earth. But we can also miss out on God's amazing plan for our lives. Gladys Aylward was a missionary 100 years or so ago, and she failed all the applications to the missionary societies because she was a simple, uneducated chambermaid. But she went to China anyway because she'd heard God's call on her life. She started an orphanage, and some years later she saved the lives of hundreds of children when the Japanese invaded China. But she often said that she thought the person called to that mission field in China was probably a man, maybe very educated, even a doctor. And because he was disobedient and didn't go, she got the chance to go instead, and she got the blessing. There's no greater fulfillment in life than following the path that our Heavenly Father has laid out for us. Because at the end of the day, our Father wants the best for us. I adored my earthly father, and his love for me wasn't dependent on my behaviour. But I always wanted to please him because I loved him. I did let him down a few times. And this is what Jesus said in John 14, verse 21. He who has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me, and I will love him, and he will be loved by my Father. I will love him and show myself to him. You see, as we obey our Heavenly Father, he reveals more of himself to us. It's a bit like laying railway tracks. Nobody ever builds a railway line by laying all the tracks on one side for miles and miles. They put the sleepers down, they lay one metal track, and then parallel to it, they lay the other one. And that's how it is with obedience. As we obey, God reveals. As we obey, God reveals. And conversely, if we don't take a step that God is urging us to do, he won't necessarily reveal more of himself or more of his plans for our lives. I've been reading the book of Acts in the last few days, and it's full of stories of great obedience and acts of courage. If you look in Acts 5 verse 8, it's the second time that Peter and the disciples are arrested for preaching about Jesus. They've already been told not to the first time, but they carried on. And when challenged by the high priest, this is their reply: we must obey God rather than men. So Saul took up the job of persecuting the Christians, and after his dramatic encounter on the Damascus road, which left him blind, God then told Ananias to go and lay hands on him. Well, you can understand that Ananias wasn't terribly keen, but he went anyway. And as they say, the rest is history, because Saul's eyesight was healed and his name was changed to Paul, and he turned the then known world upside down for the gospel. He brought the good news to Jews across many, many countries, and eventually was martyred for his faith. And for Ananias, what a joy to have been used in that sequence of events, all because he was obedient. The Bible and all of history is littered with stories of men and women who have obeyed the voice of God, even when it seemed like madness. And often these people who did great things learned to obey God in the small things. So we need to hear that still small voice. And courage is not always getting up and going off to far-flung places. It's often being willing to risk our reputation. Someone in our community was in a pub one evening, and with friends, God drew her attention to a man nearby and told her to pray for his shoulder. So she went to the ladies, as one always should in a crisis. But as she came out of the toilets, she went over to the man and said, I'd like to pray for your shoulder. He was shocked and said that he'd had pain in his shoulder for months. So she prayed for him. And next week, bumped into him, he bowled over to her to say that his shoulder had been healed. Now, as yet, we don't know whether that man's become a believer. And we won't always know the result of our obedient actions, not until we get to heaven. But it's our obedience that matters. I'm just going to hand over to Claire, who's going to read a short passage for us.